Let us have your name and perhaps where you're from, and then we get to know each other a bit better. The hand over here, please.
West Midlands Eco Simon.
And your name?
Theresa May said that she has a deep Christian.
Not Theresa May.
Theresa May, yes.
We know who Theresa May is, but we'd love to know who you are.
Oh, sorry, it's too long. She said she has a deep Christian faith. She didn't say that this was going to make any difference to government policy, but then on the radio they said, should that influence her policies? My question to you is, do you think her Christian faith is going to make any difference?
We'll take a group. Shall we had some hands over here. I think that the person there. Yes.
Stephanie Norton from Hanwell, West London.
Thank you.
A member of Global Justice now. I'm worried because I find that in many parishes, local justice and peace groups make a big deal of the fact that they're a fair trade parish. And they're talking about fair trade, which benefits a few farmers. It does indeed get them out of poverty. But it's not the same as the trade rules made for the benefit of the rich countries. So that's why we need trade justice.
And one behind, just behind.
Andrew Milne from Dunstable, Northampton Diocese. You referred to the countries that have torn up the agreement. What would happen to Egypt if they refused to pay their fine?
Great question. Ollie, do you want to take those three?
Okay, first one, Theresa May. Will her faith make a difference? I wouldn't think so. I mean, it's like, is she going to be a better Prime Minister because she's a woman? Well, I want to see what policies you're going to bring in. I mean, she was part of the government that brought in the bedroom tax. Well, we could list a whole lot of things. I mean, I would hope so, but there are many politicians and as chief executives who have a strong faith, and that doesn't mean that they always act in public interest or the common good. But it's a good question to ask her. And Stephanie, about the fair trade. Daphne, sorry. It's very interesting because WDM, as was part of the group of organisations that helped set up fair trade and establish the fair trade mark in the first place. And I think it's something we should be really proud of because it's almost a standard, a very, I would say quite a basic standard, but a standard about how we think trade should happen. But, you know, as campaigners, just because you've achieved a certain number of people buying fair trade products, that doesn't mean we put our feet up and think, oh, it's fine, we don't have to do anything else. The next steps are about making that standard harder. You know, there are lots of things that aren't covered by the fair trade standard. It's just how the thing is produced. It doesn't tell you anything about the fair trade conditions for transporting those raw materials or the goods before they end up on your shelf, for example. And some of the systems for checking the workers' rights as part of the fair trade standard could be better as well. But I think you're right. I mean, I think for me, when I think about fair trade now, I think it's a brilliant way to first engage people in thinking about how trade and action that they can take can have a positive impact on somebody somewhere else. But you're right, what we want is a systemic change and a system that delivers trade justice, not just fair trade. And lastly, Andrew, about Egypt. I don't think that case has properly been finished yet, but what Egypt will be looking at would be a very big fine in the billions probably. A case just came through against Russia where they have been asked to pay 50 billion in compensation. And the court that manages this is, and there are a few of them, some of them we don't even know where they are, they're so secretive, but in particular there are some in Geneva, and they implement, once they've made the ruling, if the country doesn't just hand over the money, they are able to authorise assets to be seized of that government. So that's what's being threatened at the moment with Russia and paying the 50 billion fine, that other governments could seize Russian assets to even out the loss that those countries have had as a result of that action. So that's how it's enforced. I mean, there isn't that's what's so frustrating about this whole parallel legal system, that it's entirely opaque. You can't. Many of the cases that are brought, that it's so secretive. There's not even a public record of them. Only some of the courts produce a public record to tell you what has happened or what is in procedure. And as to how they all get settled in the end, again, it's very difficult to track all of them. But that from the cases that have been public, that's what we've learned happens.
More questions? One over here.
I'm Barbara Kentish, Justice and Peace Worker for the Westminster Diocese. We've been battling away trying to get fair trade established for the last 8 years, and I've only managed a third of the diocese. And my question, I suppose, is, can local grassroots groups really get their teeth into opposing TTIP when they can't even get their teeth into buying the fair trade coffee? In other words, how do you engage grassroots people in such an enormous, overwhelming issue?
And the person just behind you.
Dave Archibald, Newcastle. The one thing corporations don't like is openness. We've had two big leaks. Obviously, the Panama Papers leak, which has revealed quite a bit about some dodgy deals, including David Cameron's father. Probably more out there. And also we've had there's a big leak in Luxembourg, where it was Price Waterhouse employees released information about illegal activities by various individuals and companies, particularly in Luxembourg, which is effectively a tax haven. But what was interesting, particularly, is the fact that I think Price Waterhouse arranged for the prosecution of the leakers concerned, and actually they have been prosecuted and sentenced, I understand. What's the impact of that, this type of leak of information, as far as their global justice is concerned, and how we get more leaks like this?
Question over that side.
My name's Pat Gaffney from Pax Christi. I just wondered if you have any more information about what's happening with the public procurement boycotts kind of legislation that came in February, I think, that is trying to, it's affecting a lot of campaign groups who are trying to work with their local authorities and others to challenge them about trade deals, say, with Israel or on arms companies. And this legislation is trying to prevent local authorities from taking such actions.
Okay, do you want to take those three points?
Yeah, so Barbara, brilliant question. How do you engage grassroots supporters? We were very conscious of this when we started working on TTIP, thinking, we're just going to terrify everybody and baffle you with all of these acronyms and no one would want to take action. And actually, we found it very easy to engage people because there are so many different ways that the deals can impact on people's lives, and there are so many things that seem utterly outrageous. The fact that the negotiations were in secret, the fact that there's all the evidence that's come out shows that there are no benefits for our economies or ordinary people at all, no new jobs, no increase in cost of living. There were lots of very obvious things, threats to... there's a whole load of tanning salons in Liverpool up in arms because of the concern about the impact of all these dangerous chemicals that are in US products being able to come in the EU. So there are loads and loads of different funny angles that almost, if you were anything you might be bothered about, was probably covered by a TTIP trade deal and then the possible implications. So that made it quite easy. And I mean, many of you probably have worked on trade before. You remember being involved in maybe the multilateral agreement on investment, the first thing I ever got involved in, or the general agreement on trade in services. And you haven't forgotten any of what you knew then. And I mean, this is like a Frankenstein mash-up of both of those things. And you know, last time everybody got their heads around it, and this time people seem to have no trouble in understanding the nature of it and why we want to do something. the more tricky bit I was worried about was about, well, these deals seem very European domestic focused, and you know, many of our groups have been involved in issues because of our concern about the global south and how do we explain that relationship. But the negotiators took care of that for us too, because they said, well, you know, part of the reason we want this TTIP deal is because it'll be a blueprint. Anything that gets agreed between the US and the EU will be what has to happen everywhere in the world. I'm like, right, fine, that's it then. You've just given us our reason to need to stop this now, because if we don't stop the deal here, it will just be rolled out around the world. I think today, the importance of leaks. Actually, WikiLeaks have been offering millions of dollars for information on TISA, the Trade and Services Agreement, because there seems to be no other way to get hold of the information, which is quite interesting. The leaks, the Panama Papers and what happened in Luxembourg haven't had a direct effect on our campaigns on trade, but they definitely have exposed the dealings that go on behind the scenes and have added to the sense that corporations are getting away with a lot and not being held to account, which is really important. And in fact, one of the reactions of the European Commission that negotiates most of these trade deals has been to set up a lot of web pages with lots of information there to help people feel that they can see what's going on. They've, for the first time in any kind of trade negotiation, they always have public press conferences, they always invite members of civil society to come and hear the press conferences. I mean, we know what we're going to hear, but there's been an attempt to make some of the process seem more transparent. Obviously, the bit that we all want to get involved in is what they're actually negotiating, and they're not letting us know about that or making that bit publicly accessible or transparent. But I think the pressure has. There've been some of these changes around the edges, which is it's a good sign, and it shouldn't really be underestimated. And lastly, Pat, your question about the public procurement boycott. The government has been changing the ways it wants to structure pension funds that local authorities have. And part of the changes, most of them aren't great, but part of the changes are to say that you can't boycott particular products or countries unless that is a policy that's supported by the government, which is pretty tricky because most often the kind of boycotts and those kind of campaigns that people want to run are contrary to government policy. And I think this really highlights for me, and I didn't mention it, but really within the mix of what's happening with corporations and trade, we have to look at how the influence that pension funds have on global economic policy. Pension funds are the biggest investors in anything, and so they are really important, for example, in sustaining investment in fossil fuels, but also in many of the different kind of industries and the ways that industries, the standards that you might find across industries. And I think for a long time, pension funds feel also very tricky, like trade agreements. Maybe they're too complicated to get involved in. It's hard enough trying to work out what your own pension is going to be, let alone all the kind of complicated structure. But as long as we ignore what's happening with pension funds, the influence they have, and how by changing what a pension fund invests in, you can change the whole structure of our economy, we're missing a really important trick.
Any more? One here. And one here.
Thank you. Thanks, Polly. Yeah, it's great work that you're doing. Thank you very much. It's Paul Godman from Green Christian. I just wanted to explore how the concern in this room about TTIP plays with the concern that was expressed somewhat inarticulately in the EU referendum. Both are about unease with global forces or forces that are beyond the national reach, the reach of national government. And so one question I suppose is simply, what's UKIP's position on this? Another might be, to what extent is the EU to blame for the secrecy that has shrouded this whole process? you know, are we actually engaged in a similar? Is there an overlap in the areas of concern that we are finding in these two debates?
Question over here.
Hi, Danica Marcos, Westminster Diocese student. I wanted to ask, why is the EU trying to push for TTIP if it doesn't benefit anyone but the corporations? Aren't they supposed to be there to help people and not necessarily big companies or even little ones? So, yeah.
Any more for now? Yes, right at the back. This person near you, just behind your shoulder.
Hi, I'm Doug from Wigan. And my question, I don't know anything about this, thanks for your talk, it's really interesting, but one of the big issues from what I can see seems to be this lobbying situation. The people who make these trade deals and make things happen, if you're offered money or other benefits for making certain things happen, most people, unless they're very Christian, are going to just do what's best for them and make a trade deal happen that's bad for everyone else, possibly, if they're being lobbied or encouraged by private interests, like you said, 92% I think it was. So, in your own view, how important is lobbying in injustices that happen through these trade deals, and are there any restrictions on? My understanding of these things seems to be like bribes, basically, from private companies to get what they want. Is there any restrictions on that? Because as long as someone with lots of money can come along and offer people money to get what they want out of the trade deal, how's it ever going to change? Thanks.
Okay, Paul, TTIP, the EU referendum, Brexit. How long have we got? So UKIP's position on TTIP. UKIP opposes TTIP, but when there have been important votes in the European Parliament, they haven't turned up. I would not bet any sort of money on UKIP sticking to that position. It seemed to me UKIP's position on opposing TTIP was because there were concerns about the impact of TTIP on the NHS. The NHS is popular, and so UKIP really wanted to try and define itself as standing up for British things like the NHS. I think that's pretty much where they got to. They haven't done any analysis, as far as I'm aware. I mean, I think TTIP is an example which has been very difficult in the referendum because there's not very much good to say about it, and it's probably certainly for me, it's the best example of everything I struggle with about the EU. I mean, there are many things that I'm sure we can think of that are good about Europe, but for the EU, the TTIP really does epitomise the influence that corporations have, the unaccountability of the European Commission, the civil service at an EU level, and you know, the secrecy around negotiations. I mean, the fact that when TTIP was announced, it was at a press conference for the G7. We weren't meant to be looking at any of this stuff. It was announced, we're going to have these few negotiations that will be done in 18 months. I mean, it hasn't been. That was 2013. I mean, best case scenario, they might have something agreed by 2020, if at all. And that is down to the work of campaigners at pushing and asking and exposing it. So I think that's one of the very tricky things about TTIP, that there's nothing, it is not a positive record for the EU on TTIP. But that doesn't mean that there are other reasons why you want to support, you know, the EU and to be part of Europe. There are plenty of things that you might want to think about there, but on TTIP, it's not a good record. And then the question about, a really good question, if it's so bad, why is the EU pushing for it? And I think there's a couple of things that are important to note. One is that for the bunch of civil servants that work in the European Commission, there is a very common ideology about how the economies work, how markets work, and the role of business in that. And for many of those civil servants, it's a very positive thing. giving corporations, supporting corporations, encouraging economic growth. I mean, I think they need to pay a lot more attention to the evidence that shows that trickle-down doesn't work. But that is very much the basis, and I'm very concerned that in the European Commission there doesn't seem to be at all any healthy debate about, well, maybe your economic model isn't the only one. And I think mixed with that is the fact that trade deals are very difficult to negotiate. They take a very long time. We haven't negotiated very many around the world in the last 25 years, which is why when you go maybe and talk to your MP and raise concerns about TTIP, most MPs have never even seen a trade agreement. These things haven't been being negotiated. So a lot of our work and a lot of the work of Global Justice Now supporters has been to help sort of share some of that information and explain it to people who've never had that experience. And you'll have heard in all of the media recently, oh my gosh, the UK's got to negotiate all these trade agreements. We don't have any trade negotiators. We've got 20 in the country. We're offering our services, but they've not taken us up just yet. but if there's that few, there is very, very limited experience. So I think that also adds to the mix that most people, if you say, well, do we need trade? Is trade a good thing? Well, you kind of think, well, yes. It's when you look at the detail that you realise where the problems lie. And I think so it's those two issues with why we end up with the EU pushing this kind of deal. And Doug, in terms of how important lobbying is, I haven't seen any evidence of money changing hands, just to be clear, but there are plenty of meetings. Yes, they're really, really important because we can see the trail of much of the lobbying that's been going on TTIP, for example, is not done by individual corporations. It's done by their kind of industry body groups of services industries, groups of telecom industries, groups of extractive industries. That's how they undertake the lobbying. And you can see this sort of beautiful sequencing of a statement goes up on an industry lobby group. This is the kind of trade deal we'd like to see. It should have in A, B, C. And then 3 days later, there's an announcement on the Commission's website. Well, we're really interested in trade that does A, B, C.